When I got to the barn this morning, I was thinking, boy, I got to come up with some visual aids here or something because I figured we'd be stuck inside. So the only thing I had in the car was a bunch of Band-Aids. So I'm going to try to work Band-Aids into the discussion here as we go. Why do I have Band-Aids in the car? Well, had a good fatherly moment last night. I was at my son's Little League game. 8-year-old, so you know it's interesting. You still have some dandelion folks in the outfield and some really aggressive guys playing. And he said all year, he's like, "Dad, what I want to accomplish this year is my first headfirst slide." I thought, you know, we're not supposed to promote that. It's not safe, whatnot. But I said, you know, sometimes you have to do what you have to do, and if it's the only way you can be safe at second, third, or home, then that's what you have to do. Sure enough, he was on first, his ground ball. It's going to be a play at second base. I could just see it coming. He's halfway. I was like, oh, this is it. He's gonna take a digger right into second base, lays into it, safe, sticks his hand on, looks up. I was like, oh, geez, you know, I don't know. He was safe, and then waited a second, then hit a red chin. So his chin hit the ground. I was like, oh boy, that's what I feared. So everyone runs out there, brings him in, fills his chin up with Band-Aids. He looks, he's like, "Dad, how'd I do?" I said, "Well, you know, you got a bloody chin, but you were safe." And he goes, "But I bet you I looked pretty cool, didn't I?" You know. I said, "That a boy, get back out there," and then game went on. So it's, again, one of those once-in-a-lifetime moments that you'll never forget. So somehow we'll work Band-Aids into the discussion today. A little bit what we were going to show out there today, talk about management. Now I know management was brought up a little bit here this morning. You know, when you look at going from 76 to 81 bushels to the acre this last year, record state average wheat crop. Some are surprised, some aren't surprised. In my opinion, I'm not that surprised. And why? If you look at the way wheat, in my opinion, has typically been handled, you know, for the last 20, 30 years, you know, it's more of what I refer to as the red-headed stepchild of field crops. All right? When I say that, I mean, you know, if I get it into the fall, it's fine. If I don't, I'll just switch over to corn or soybeans. If I get it in the fall and it winter kills, you know, I'll just till it and plant corn or soybeans. You know, if it doesn't look so good in the spring, I'll just till it and I can plant corn or soybeans. But what meetings like this and other meetings with the wheat checkoff is really doing, we're discussing management. And so for the first time in a long time, we're actually talking about management. And we're using the T word that I always tell students. What's the T word? We're thinking. We're thinking about how to grow wheat. And one of the interesting projects that we have out there this year is looking at about 6 or 7 different management inputs. Because when I talk to wheat growers, one of the biggest fears, and I'll say fears with growing wheat, is it takes too much management, especially when you talk to a lot of the growers that grow the smaller acreage. Okay, you're talking 50, 100, 200, 300, 400 acres. You know, well, you know, it's just too much management to grow wheat. I can't do it well. It takes too many inputs. Why should I go down that road when I can put corn or beans in the spring and call my co-op and they can spray on 28 and I'm done till harvest time? Okay, point taken. But there's a lot of perception and misperception about management. And what does a actively growing wheat crop really need? And so that's one of the things that we wanted to look at this year, is looking at about 6 or 7 inputs. Most are fertility focused, and seeing what effect they have. So I have a new graduate student, Dan Quinn, who's standing over here. He's looking at what we call an omission plot trial structure. And we have this going both on soft red down at campus and white wheat up here. That's one of the things we would have looked at today. So we're looking at about 6 or 7 different inputs, one being nitrogen only, another being high N, another being a urease inhibitor, another being nitrification inhibitor, another being a plant growth regulator, another being fungicide, and another being micronutrients. And the gist of this study is we have an enhanced treatment that gets all 6 or 7 of those things that I just mentioned. Okay, and then part of that enhanced treatment is we slowly pull one out. All right, so instead of having all 7 things in there, we have 6. And then when we take it to yield and you pull one management input out, guess what? You can see the actual impact that that specific input had on that total yield. And then we'll pull another one out, and another one out, and another one out. On the flip side, we have what we call the traditional approach. The traditional approach would be we do nothing other than nitrogen at green up. That's it. And then to that traditional approach, we then add a fungicide application. We add a PGR application. We add a high-end application. We add a micronutrient application. And then we can see incrementally, stepwise, by adding one input at a time, what impact each individual input can have. You know, items like phosphorus and potassium, we didn't throw in there. A lot of that is pretty standard. You know, there's a lot of talk about phosphorus out there right now. Again, when you're above critical, we're much, much less likely to see a response. What that critical level is for Michigan is 25 parts per million. Some of us still mistakenly think it's 40 ppm. Potassium obviously is going to vary a little bit by soil texture. So typically your 75 plus 2.5 times your CEC ends up being your critical soil K levels. So a lot of that is more prescription, but some of this other stuff isn't prescription. So what we wanted to do is see how each of these inputs performs, both on soft red and soft white wheat. Now, genetically, they might be fairly similar, but we do tend to see a little bit of difference between the reds and whites in the fields, which is why we're doing it on both of those. And so again, you know, looking at each of those inputs, you know, N only, high N, et cetera, oftentimes when you talk about high nitrogen, that's where the Band-Aid tends to come in. We think high nitrogen can cover up poor management. All right, but nitrogen is not a Band-Aid for poor management. All right, and when we talk about management and we talk about high nitrogen, they're not synonymous terms. One thing we've noticed the last 3 or 4 years is oftentimes when you go out with a high N study, it gets labeled as intensively managed. Well, in my book, a high N study is a high nitrogen study. When you start talking about intensively managed wheat, that all goes back and starts at planting date. Okay, and again, a lot of what we've seen with planting date the last couple of years, you're looking at probably anywhere from between about 15 and 30 bushel to the acre increases just based on planting date. Again, why is that important? Look at commodity prices and where they're at. I can't go down to local co-op and buy 5 gallons of planting date. All right? The grower is in control of that planting date, and it's free. And being in the region that we are, there's a lot of options with regards to planting date and getting that wheat in on time. And they're increasing as time goes on. You know, not every wheat production area has dry beans. Okay, dry beans come out at a decent time, early September. It's great rotation crop to get wheat in on time. Another one that's coming into play here in the thumb would be early harvest sugar beets. Early harvest sugar beets would then now create another management tool or opportunity to get wheat planted on time. So again, when you talk about nitrogen, there's no amount of nitrogen in the world that's going to cover up poor management. Now, with a statement like that, some people may think, well, he's anti-nitrogen, whatever. I love nitrogen just like the next grower. It's a great fertilizer. It's fantastic. All right? But again, it's not a Band-Aid tool. Other aspects that we're looking at, tiller production. All right? I know I don't like to count tillers in the field. Dan doesn't like to count tillers in the field. My previous graduate students don't like to count tillers in the field. Our undergrad helpers don't like to count tillers in the field. I'm guessing if I would ask anybody who does like to count tillers in the field in this room, there may not be any hands that go into the air. And so one thing we've looked at the last couple of years is measurables in the field that can predict yield. So again, we've looked at autumn tiller counts, we've looked at spring tiller counts, we've looked at chlorophyll meters, we've looked at green seekers, we've looked at NDVI, we've looked at tissue N at Feeks 5, we've looked at tissue N at flagleaf. We've looked at a lot of things. And unfortunately, the most positive, consistent correlation we have to grain yield is autumn tiller production. All right? Again, still, hands down, that autumn tiller production really dictates where you can go with that ceiling with your yield potential. So again, we've looked a lot about that, or looked a lot at planting date with that the last couple of years, and again, it just sticks out like a sore thumb, which is why then planting date becomes such an issue. Because typically the earlier, within reason, we can plant in the fall, again, 10 to 14 days within that Hessian fly-free date, the greater the chance we have to increase fall tiller production. And fall tillers always out-yield spring tillers. All right, it has to do with partitioning of sugars in the plant and what is being produced in the spring and what is being supported. So those are the couple things we've looked at the last couple of years. Again, with this omission plot trial, what we're really trying to do is find out where should that grower invest their dollars. All right, if you have X amount of dollars, okay, and your management level is high, medium, low, this will give you the most bang for your buck, and that is what we are really trying to hone in on. Because as commodity prices fluctuate, and they will, they'll go up, they'll go down, they'll stay steady, the one thing that we have to do is whatever input we choose has to be able to withstand those fluctuations in commodity price. All right, because that commodity price might change on us in between fall planting and summer harvest. So it has to be able to withstand that fluctuation in price. And that's one thing that we've really tried to take a look at. Another thing that we've looked at the last couple of years, and we're about to come out with a paper on it here soon, is the use of plant growth regulators in wheat production. Okay, and again, I'm going to use my fancy, I think it's a frozen Anna and Elsa Band-Aid here. Plant growth regulators have been kind of marketed as a Band-Aid approach. All right, and that's really not what they are intended for. All right, what we've seen the last couple of years across 4 different site years in both red and white varieties, we've seen about a 5% yield bump when we use a plant growth regulator. All right. We've also seen decreases in lodging when lodging does occur by about 67 to 83%. Okay, when lodging does occur, again, we can't predict lodging. We've seen the earlier you apply it, typically the better off. So that Feeks 5, Feeks 6 timing has performed much better than a 7 or 8 timing. About 12 ounces to the acre has been the best rate that we've seen the last couple of years. And we've dropped that wheat height by about 2.8 inches, so almost about 3 inches. And most of that height difference has come in the peduncle of the plant, or that area in between the flag leaf and the bottom of that grain head. Okay, so that's where we've seen the most height reduction. One thing we would have seen out there today is this year, at least on Jupiter here at the farm, we've probably seen a little more than a 3-inch height drop in that overall height, at least to this point in time. So it can be a useful tool. But interestingly enough, you know, when you look at some studies on wheat and N rate and PGR, you know, paper out of Kentucky just came out a couple weeks ago that we've looked at also. When you talk about plant height, okay, N rate really has very little to do with plant height. All right, you can go with a low, medium, or high N rate, and the plant height ends up being pretty similar. Okay, so a lot of that is environmental and genetically driven. So if you're just going out at a high nitrogen rate, it doesn't automatically mean, oh my gosh, it's high end, the plant's going to grow taller, the Band-Aid approach, I might as well go out with a plant growth regulator. Okay, it doesn't really work that way. Where we've seen the biggest success with using a PGR would be something where you either use a taller variety. So Eric Olson comes out with a variety trial report every late summer. Okay, look at those mean plant heights. Okay, and if you're middle to the high end of the road, you're much more probable or much more likely to see a response to a plant growth regulator. Okay, the other thing is look at the lodging incidence. Okay, look at that stem strength, etc. Is it a variety that's more prone to lodging? Okay, so those would be the two factors that we've noticed that play a much greater emphasis on seeing a response to a plant growth regulator on wheat rather than just simply nitrogen rate. Other interactions, we know the nitrogen rate fungicide interaction, has gone back in time for many, many years, so that is nothing new. The higher end, typically the more moisture you get in the plant, which is then why you see a response to fungicide. So those are the couple of things that we've noticed. Other studies we have out in the field this year, also if you get a chance to get out there today, we got your typical end response trial. That always opens up a few people's eyes. We got from 0 to 200 units of N. We got 3 or 4 different splits in there. We got high N with PGR. We got lower N with PGR also. So a couple different tools to look at out there. But the big thing that we've focused on, and we're going to focus on for the next year or two, is exactly where do we invest those dollars. We know nitrogen requires the greatest amount of money. It's the greatest input that we go with. Okay, that's not going to change most likely. But where do we go from there? All right, we know we've done a lot of work with splits, timings, etc. We've kind of been there, done that. But look at some of these other inputs and really what to hone in on from an investment standpoint to get your return on investment. What is it worth that wheat grower investing their money in to raise the bar on yield potential for wheat production? So with that, I'll wrap it up. If there's any other questions, concerns, etc., I can entertain those now. Otherwise, I'll be around through lunch. Question? Yep, we have. The question was, when using a PGR, have we seen the stem diameter change in wheat? And we have seen it change slightly. Okay, it has increased. The exact measurement I don't have in my head, but we have seen it increase, and that's not unexpected. The interesting thing is Palisade, which is the PGR we used in this study, isn't a new product. The chemistry isn't new. It was used in the turf market. You can go back all the way to, I want to say, probably one of the first papers on that came out in about 88 or 89. Okay, and the reason they used it there, it does increase the stolen strength or stem strength. The other thing it does, it greens it up beautifully. If you look at PGR versus non-PGR treated wheat, even at a sufficient N rate, that PGR will turn that wheat to that jalapeno green that we all love to see in the field, and that makes us sleep better at night. And again, some of that sentiment, some growers place value on that too. It does green up the flag leaf to some extent also. So we have seen benefits with regards to that stem strength. Plant height, again, based on cultivar selection. But it's not solely based on nitrogen rate. When you look at yield response to a nitrogen rate by PGR interaction, we've actually seen greater benefit to a PGR at some of these lower nitrogen rates, believe it or not. So we've actually seen greater benefit at something like 75 units of N than we have at 135 units of N. So it kind of goes counter to what we think that compound is intended for. Other questions? Yes? Yep. So the question was, with regards to micros, do we tend to see more or greater chance for a sulfur response? Question is yes and no. It's a good political answer for you, right? We did a lot of sulfur work when I first started, the first 2 or 3 years, and we wrapped a lot of that up. We didn't see a whole lot, and then I don't do sulfur work for a year, and then all of a sudden the question started again. Well, why aren't you doing sulfur work? All right, we did some of that. We haven't seen a tremendous response to S on wheat. We've seen much greater response on corn. We've seen a little bit of a response in sugar beet. Soybean, we haven't gotten a response either. On wheat, we looked at it 2 years in a row. Didn't see a whole heck of a lot of response. Now that would have been 2012 and 2013. Okay, S deposition continues to drop, believe it or not. When you look at why do we get less S deposition? Again, it has to go back to that Clean Air Act from the early 70s. It takes time for some of those measures to be implemented and to measure some of the results of that. So actually, we do have somewhat of a cleaner atmosphere with regards to sulfate. we actually see less sulfate falling from the sky than we did 20 or 30 years ago. How much less? About 75 or 80%. But on wheat so far, we have not seen an S response. Doesn't mean you're not going to see it. Where are you more likely to see a response to sulfur? That would be your coarse textured soils, so your sandy soils that are about 1% organic matter or less. Usually, if you're about, I want to say about 2.8% organic matter or higher, you're much less likely to see a response to sulfur. But then again, wheat's a little different. You know, I tend to categorize wheat as the perennial of annual crops. And I do that because it has to go through dormancy, then it has to green up in the spring. So you could have high organic matter, but that organic matter is not going to mineralize in time for that wheat crop. So you got to have some sulfate in the ground for that plant to tap into. If you are interested in an S application, you know, the thing with sulfur, oftentimes we group it in with NP and K, okay, and it's not NP and K. I call sulfur the minor macronutrient, all right? And why do I do that? You only need it for even a 80 to probably 130 bushel wheat crop. You only need about 20 to 40 units of S, okay? So this isn't something that you need 300, 400, 500 units of sulfate at one time. At those levels, you can actually start to see a little bit of antagonism as far as sulfate being an anion and nitrate being an anion. And so there's only so many spaces in that soil or in that profile for cations and anions to latch into or to latch onto. But again, if you are interested in S application, we never saw a difference between fall S and spring S. So some of that may have to do with price, whatever S product you use. Do you get it cheaper in the fall? Do you get it cheaper in the spring? Some of it may have to do with timing. Do you go all at green up or are you all at Feeks 5? If you do go with the spring application, I would err on the side of caution and go with as early as possible. So probably a green up or a round green up S application to see that full benefit of S. And S can leach. Okay, we got to keep that in mind. You may have sufficient S levels, and if we get into one of those springs, like April of 2013, where we got 8 inches of rain in April, you will start to get sufficient S leaching, just like you do nitrate. All right, if you get into a dry pattern, like we've had the last, I'm going to say, 3 springs now, where we get maybe an inch of rain in March and an inch of rain in April, you're much less likely to see a response to an S application in those scenarios. Other questions? Yes? Question was, do we find any difference with nitrogen stabilizers? Again, yes and no. Where it becomes difficult to make a recommendation on stabilizers, you know, there's lots of stabilizers out there. The big mistake a lot of people make is using them in the wrong manner. So urease inhibitors intended for a certain manner, nitrification inhibitor is also intended, and there's probably, ballpark, I'm going to say 30 to 50 different products out there. I will say some products work better than others, but the one key ingredient you need to see a response to a stabilizer is what? Can anybody shout it out? Exactly. I heard rain from somebody. You need rain. And what does rain cause? You know the old song goes, rain makes corn. Corn makes whiskey. That's the important part of that song, right? Rain makes end-loss conditions. And if you do not have nitrogen loss conditions, there is no reason to see a response to a stabilizer. And so that's where the difficulty in making a static recommendation comes in. You know, if I had my crystal ball and I could predict, yes, April and May of 2016 would be wet, I'd be the richest man on earth. But we can't do that. And so the one key ingredient you need to see a consistent response to stabilizers is you need nitrogen loss conditions. If you don't have end-loss conditions, you will not see a response. There's no reason to see a response. If you do have end-loss conditions, that's where you tend to oftentimes see a greater response. And sometimes we can induce a response to cause nitrogen loss. I know some growers will cut their N rate maybe 10, 15%, and you artificially create those end loss conditions, but then you also pay for the cost of the product. So that's one way of doing it. If you spin all of your N on pre-plant and leave it on the surface, you're much more likely to volatilize a greater percentage of your nitrogen. Again, you created a condition where you tend to see a greater percentage of N loss. So in those conditions, you would then see it. On wheat production, I didn't put it in the handout, we've seen a significant response. The biggest response to N stabilizers, again, goes back to April 2013. And again, why? 8 inches of rain. Okay, after our green up applications, we got 8 inches of rain, I want to say in about 14 to 16 days. It was just wet. And because it was wet, we saw a response to both urease inhibitors and nitrification inhibitors. When you get into these drier years, we tend to see much less of a response. 2014, we still saw, I want to say about a 3 to 5 bushel bump with both classes of those products. Last year, we saw a diddly squat. We saw nothing because it was so dry. The other thing to keep in mind with the stabilizers, if you split apply your nitrogen, you're much less likely to see a response to those stabilizers. And the reason there is, the later you apply your N, you've avoided those N-loss conditions. Okay, so you got less opportunity to get that 3, 4, 5 inch rain. But the thing you got to be careful about by pushing that N application too late is, do you want your N on the ground, in the ground, or in the plant? You want it in the plant. And sometimes when we start pushing our N application closer to feet 6, feet 7, in some cases later than that, if the faucet shuts off, then you're left with N on the ground or in the ground. And nitrogen needs water to move up into the plant. If you don't get enough water, it won't work its way up into the plant. So that's, again, with regards to those stabilizers, the later you apply it, the less likely you are to see a response. And again, with split applications of N in general, in dry seasons, we don't see a response to split N applications. In wet seasons, we do. And why? Because you got those N-loss conditions. Other questions, concerns? All right.